Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today we are going to go over my 1970s wrap up. Now, before I begin the wrap up, two minor little points. First off, I apologize for this going up late. I am behind on filming for the second thing that I'm going to apologize for, which is it's like in the high 90s, low 100s in LA this like past weekend going through this upcoming week, and I don't have air conditioner, so in order to film I have to turn my fan off and I instantly just start like pouring sweat. So I didn't bother putting on makeup for this because it would just melt off, and if I start glistening throughout this recording, it's because it's really freaking hot in here. So, getting into the books as fast as I possibly can so I can turn the fan back on. The 1970s sucked. Like, there was some serious problems with people in the 1970s and what the absolute shit they were writing. Like, I did not give a single book on this list that I can remember higher than a 3 stars, and I had a 1-star book in here. I think almost everything is 3 stars and then one star, but it was mostly just bad, really problematic. There are so many just unnecessarily racist or sexist things that were written in the 70s, and it's like, I have been reading since the 1900s, and you would think that I would have come across like a high volume of racist or sexist things, but it's so much worse in the 70s. What did my parents grow up with? Anyway, starting out with 1972, I read The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty? I actually don't know how to say his name. So this is a horror story about a little girl who is possessed by a demon. You don't really know why she's possessed or anything like that, and you don't really, like, they don't even admit, I don't know if you can see this, but this tab right here, so they don't admit she's possessed until the tab, and this is the only part of the book that you get where they're actually like admitting that, hey, maybe she does really need a priest and needs to be exorcised. Overall, this is a pretty decent book. It's not great, but it's not awful. It was very mediocre to me. The only real problem I had with it is how it treats Satanists, the Satanist religion, and it's very misleading at like what that religion is actually about. Very uneducated, very biased, and like the Satanist religion isn't anything about like the ultimate sins of whatever Christians believe. It's just a different religion, and they actually tend to be a whole lot nicer than some fundamentalist Christian groups. So there's that, but yeah, didn't particularly care for how that religion was treated, but overall it wasn't like a horrible book, and it wasn't a great book. For all of these books, I also watched the movie except for this one because I can't deal with the little girl crab walking backwards down the stairs. It just skeeves me out so bad that I can't. So this is the only one that I didn't watch the movie. I have seen the movie before, but it just skeeves me out. Next up, for 1972, I read Stepford Wives by Era Levin. This is a short story or novella about like a community called Stepford where all of the wives are like perfect 1950s housewife, like the most stereotypical commercial 1950s housewives you can think of is what all of the women like this, or all of the women behave in this book. And this is kind of like all of the women have moved here, and they're all, before they moved to Stepford, like really powerful, smart, intelligent businesswomen, and they give up everything to become like quintessential housewives. And it's very like this, there's something wrong here. So basically what this is like a psychological thriller. The ending is very open-ended, so you don't really know what happens without giving anything away. And overall this was a pretty decent book. It wasn't like groundbreaking, but it was pretty interesting. The science is very dated. It doesn't really make sense. But if you look past that, pretty decent book. The movie, on the other hand, is like a comedy. Like, there's no thriller to it. It's more of like, haha, it's funny, women are treated like shit. It was very distasteful. I really didn't like it. And yeah, so for this one, I would say read the book over the movie, but they're also completely different, like, take on the same general idea. So they're completely different. You can watch the movie and read the books and just be like, oh yeah, those are two completely different stories based on the same, like, premise. But I would skip the movie, maybe read the book, maybe not. It's not really worth anybody's time, in my opinion. Next up was Once Is Not Enough by Jacqueline Susan, and holy fucking daddy issues. This entire book is just a girl who wants to fuck her dad, and it is the creepy, actually no, it's not. There's something worse coming up. As far as incesty. What is wrong with you 1970s? Why are you so incesty? But yeah, it was like the writings, I love the writing, I love Jacqueline Susan, but overall I was just so skeeved out by her just never ending daddy issues that I could never get into the story. Basically, this girl's father is a movie producer, and her mother died very young, and she's kind of grown up idolizing her father, and somehow that turned into like daddy issues. Like, she didn't get enough love out of her father because he was traveling so much and left her at boarding school, and now the only men that she's ever wants to be with have to be like her father. It's creepy. The man that she ends up falling in love with is one of her father's peers. He's a writer who her father made a screenplay off of his novel, and he hates her father because he feels like the novel was ruined in that screenplay. And she's like head over heels in love with him. He's just, you know, using her for a piece of ass because he's an old man. He's got erectile dysfunction, and their attempts at sex with his erectile dysfunction are vividly described in this book. And it's so skeevy. I don't like it. So, not a fan of this. The movie is basically the same, except for like it cuts out, obviously, because this is a pretty thick book, but the movie cuts out like pretty decent sized chunks, but it's the same premise, tells the same story with just like some of it cut out. As I've noticed with all of Jacqueline Susan's books into movies, the book has a depressing ending, but the movie changes the ending to make it like a happy ending. So I know Valley of the Dolls did the exact same thing. So different movie and book. I would definitely say no to the movie. There is a sound quality issue from when the movie was made, and the high-pitched like music notes or screams or just loud higher-pitched notes aren't controlled well, and the sound is so painfully jarring in the movie that I just definitely would not recommend watching the movie, if only for the sound issues. You get the same story in the book. If you want to read about skeevy daddy issues, maybe it doesn't bother you as much as it creeps me out, but I would say if you definitely have some sort of interest in this, go for the book, not the movie. Next up for 1974 is Jaws. And this is my 1 star of the month. And I know you're sitting here thinking, Ari, this is a book about a shark. How can a book about a shark have a 1-star review? Well, let me tell you, and this is going to spoil it, but the spoiler that I'm about to give you has nothing to do with the overall plot, and it is something that should 100% definitely be spoiled, and you should not be like me and go into this book blindly and have to deal with this situation. But in Jaws, there is a side plot about the main character, police officers, I forgot his names, his wife is cheating on him with a marine biologist, and she's like, that has nothing to do with a fucking shark, but they go to hook up and have a conversation where she talks about her sexual fantasies, and as I quote, like every woman, she fantasizes about being raped by a black man. I mean, I can't speak for every woman, but I'm pretty sure most of us do not fantasize about being raped. That is a really creepy, creepy fantasy that I feel like men have put on women and that women don't actually fantasize about. Like, I'm in like the 99.9% sure about that. There's like possibly some women who fantasize about that, but as a whole, I feel that women don't fantasize about being sexually assaulted. I feel like women are terrified of being sexually assaulted, and shit like this is why we're terrified about being sexually assaulted. So that is problematic in itself, but then you have to add the fact that he brought race into this. And there's a bunch of little like mentions of just racist things. Like the author obviously hated black people, specifically black men. He doesn't really talk about black women, but you could tell that this man is just blatantly racist and that he hates women. And to take the racism and the misogyny and to put it in a book about a fucking killer shark is just, it ruins the book. Like 100% ruins the book. So if you're interested in the story of Jaws, I recommend watching the movie. The runtime does not allow for any sort of racism or sexism or misogyny. There is no affair. The movie is literally about a man killing a shark. So I do want to say that I highly recommend that you don't read anything by Peter Benchley. Like, this is an author that we should all boycott for his obviously problematic ideology as far as women and men of color or people of color go. Next up is Salem's Lot by Stephen King for 1975. I was wrong. I did give a book 4 stars this month, and this was it. I actually really enjoyed this. This is about vampires and the town of Salem in New England, I think. It's not Salem, Massachusetts. And it's not even Salem. It's Salem's short, Jerusalem's Lot. That's the name of it. Salem is short for Jerusalem's. So this is Jerusalem's Lot, and it's a small, like, ghost town almost. And vampires come to Salem's Lot and start killing all of the residents at night. But no one believes in vampires, so, like, what happens? Vampires in this book are very interesting. If you get bit and killed by a vampire, you become a vampire. There's no, like, you can be killed by a vampire and then you're just dead, and then vampires have to, like, actively create other vampires. These are just, like, if you get bit by a vampire, you become a vampire. It's a very thick book. All of Stephen King's books are very thick. There's a lot of character building, a lot of, like, that sort of process. So be, like, aware of all of that. I liked it. It was good. The movie was trash. The acting was awful. The visual effects were awful. That's, like, one of those, like, really bad horror movies you watch to laugh at how bad it is. So I'm definitely going to say stick with the book on this one and not the movie. But out of everything that I've read from Stephen King, which honestly is not a lot, this is my favorite so far. So if you like Stephen King and you haven't read this for some reason, definitely read it. And if you don't know if you like Stephen King, I would say start with something like this. Alright, halfway done, and I had to take a break for a minute and turn on the fan. Holy crap, it is so hot. Anyway, for 1976, I read Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice, which is another horror book about vampires. But Anne Rice's vampires are very different from Stephen King's vampires. These are more of a romantic, if evil, vampire, and you also have to, like, actively create new vampires. This is the story of the particular life of one vampire named Louis de Pointe-Lac. He was a slave slash plantation owner in the 18th century, I want to say. Before he was turned into a vampire by another vampire named Lestat de Lancourt. This is Louis' account of his life from human life up to modern times, well, 1970s modern, and it is told as Louis telling the story to a reporter who is recording everything. Now, one of the things Anne Rice does so well is all of her books are kind of like told from the perspective of the vampire who's telling the story to somebody else, whether it's Louis telling this to a reporter out loud, or Lestat wrote two books that are from Lestat's perspective. So, but Anne Rice is so good about making the writing style fit the character, and I hate Louis. His, like, attitude and brain is just so pompous and whiny that I can't really stand this book because the character development is done so well. As far as the movie goes, I grew up loving the movie and put off reading this book until my mid-30s because I was afraid that reading the book would ruin the movie for me, which I was right. Now I hate the book and I hate the movie because the movie just falls short in every single way, but you don't have to deal with like Louis' whininess in the movie. So 3 stars. I would say definitely pick one or the other. If you want to watch the movie, watch the movie. If you want to watch or read the book, read the book, but don't do both. Next up is Amityville Horror for 1977 by Jay Anson. And this is a very interesting book because this is a true story, and it really was based on a true story. Like, the people who are the characters in this book really existed as real people living in this house. The background of the young man who murdered his entire family in this house, like, really happened. He really went to jail for this. As far as the poltergeisty events that happen in this book, there is no definitive proof any of that happened, and a lot of what the people who live in this house, like their accounts, have been disproven by the people. They say, like, there's a priest in here, and it was like, the priest was like, what they said that I said happened never actually happened. So you've got that. Likely the whole thing is a bunch of like scammy bullshit, but it makes for an interesting story, thinking that it's a real story. Very, very clickbaity. It's kind of unfortunate I got to this book so late in my life, because this is a very standard poltergeist tale. And it's something that I've seen hundreds of thousands of times with different poltergeist haunting books, movies, and TV shows. So while this was like the first of like the real haunting type books, and I'm sure it was very like scary and moving and different for its time, me having read this so late in my life, I've heard this story like 80 trillion times. Like, it's the same exact story that I've heard so many times. Yeah, what do I care about it? It's the same. So it got 3 stars just because it was the same. But I appreciate, like, if you're looking for like the book that kind of started that trend, and you really like that trend, you'll probably like this. But if you've heard the poltergeist haunting a family and driving them out of the house story before, you're not getting anything new out of this. Like, you're really getting zero newness out of this. Now for the movie is nothing like the books at all. There's a couple of different movies. I watched the more modern one with Ryan Reynolds. The only same thing, it's like the house is the same and the characters' names are the same, but the events that happen in the movie are absolutely nothing like the events that happen in this book. Like, that, the movie is more of like a jump scare horror movie, and this is just like passively creepy poltergeist activity. So I wouldn't compare them. But if you're looking for like jump scare type things, this is not going to give it to you. The movie will give it to you, but the book is not going to give it to you. And I don't think they should be considered the same type of thing at all. But yes, that is Amityville. Again, another meh read. For 1978, I read Requiem for a Dream by Hubert Selby. I think I said Herbert the first time in my TBR, but it's Hubert Selby. This book, guys. So this book is about gratuitous drug use. Like, you have it's 2 dual perspectives. You've got a mother who is addicted to like things that you don't necessarily think of when you think of drugs. She's addicted to eating, she's addicted to watching television, she's addicted to like prescription medications. Things that you don't worry about being addicted to is what this woman is addicted to. And she obviously has a very addictive personality, and then you also see that in her son, who is addicted to like hard drugs, heroin, cocaine, speed, pot. I'm sure there's others, but mostly heroin is his major drug of choice. And it kind of goes through like segments of their lives where it's like ups and downs of their drug use, where you can see like the glamorous aspects of like why people would get addicted to these kind of drugs and how like wonderful their lives can be at times, and then other times when it's like, holy shit. I loved this movie growing up. It was one of my favorites. I have no idea how I managed to watch this kind of movie when I was young. Don't tell my mom, but yeah, I still really like the movie. The movie is very good. The problem I had with the book is, while the book and the movie basically have the same story, it's short and it's told in a way that it was very easy to translate into a movie format in a shorter runtime. So it's basically almost exactly the same story. There's minor differences, mostly due to like the book took place in the 70s and the movie takes place in like the 90s. So you've got like technological changes and stuff like that that they have to account for, but mostly same story. The problem with the book is because it's about drug addiction, it's told in a way that's supposed to like mimic, I guess, the like craze of drug addiction. There are no quotations. There are no paragraphs. Nothing. Like, you don't get any quotes, you don't get he said, she said, you're not even really entirely sure somebody's talking some of the times, or if it's like something in somebody's head. If somebody is talking, you don't really know who, because you don't get like, Sarah said blah blah blah. It's just like a implied. But yeah, no paragraphs, so there's no, it's very, very hard to read because of those factors. So I would definitely say, if you want this story, go with the movie, not the book. Lots of trigger warnings for this, obviously gratuitous drug use, mental health, sex work, and really gross like body horror, I guess is the way I'm going to put that. If you're squeamish, don't watch this. We'll put it that way. Don't read it either, because you get the exact same thing in the book. Next up, for 1979, we get Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. Why does this book exist? Basically, this is just a long story of child abuse and neglect going across generations. This woman falls in love with her uncle, so we start out with some spicy incest, and they get married and have 4 beautiful children who look like dolls. And then early on in the book, so this isn't a spoiler, the father dies, and the mother has always been an ornament, so she has to go back home because she can't afford to like exist or to raise her 4 children. So once they get back home, she basically tells her kids that, hey, my father disowned me, he doesn't know you exist, and I have to win back his trust, so you need to be locked in this attic room for a couple days, maybe a week, until I can present you to my father, who's old and sick and dying. And that obviously extends, and these children are locked in an attic for years. And more incest. There's a rape scene in this where the older brother rapes his younger sister. So that's a thing. That is spoilery, but definitely something you should know going into the book if you're going to read it. The writing's not great. The story's not great. It's just child abuse and incest. Like, that's the entire story. Another spoiler alert, this is going to give away the end of the book, so it is actually like a major spoiler, but it's definitely something that if you have no interest in reading the book, you should know. But the mother is so selfish that she just wants to go on like living her life without her children, so she tries to poison and murder her own children so she can get remarried and be happy. She succeeds in killing one of her children. And there's a whole series of this, but anyway, this is pretty awful. I'm going to give it a 2 stars. It's not like, it's written in a like Twilight sort of way where it's entertaining enough, even if it's badly written, that you keep reading it, but the subject matter is just awful. It's really like, I don't understand why this was ever popular. It's really just awful. As far as the movie goes, the movie has to like, I watched the Lifetime version of this movie, that's more modern one. It's creepy, it's gross, it's the same story. I definitely would say don't watch the movie or read the books, because who the F wants to read about like child abuse and incest? Anyway, next up, 1980, The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum. This is, it's a spy novel, thriller, assassin, spy thing. Basically, a guy is like injured in a accident at sea, and he loses his entire memory, but he has like weird flashes and abilities that make it, how do I say this, like he knows that he's not like a normal person. He has like the capabilities of an assassin, I guess is the best way to say it. And then the whole book is him like chasing clues in his own memory, trying to figure out like what kind of man he was. It's hard to describe without like spoiling a lot of it, so I'm going to end it there. If you've seen the movie is very different. First off, this took place in the 70s and the movie took place in like the 2000s, so obviously technology is very different. There's a theme in the movie. This is kind of spoilery, so you might want to like cut off this section, but there is a theme in the movie that the American government is burning Jason Bourne, as far as like he was a government employee, a government spy, and his usefulness has come to an end, so they're trying to kill him. That is not the case in the book. No one is like government good guy in the book. Movie government bad guy. So that's like the real main difference. Obviously this is very thick, so there's a lot more information and different characters in the book than you're going to see in the movie. But overall, it was okay. This is not my kind of book, but if you like spy thrillers and things like that, you'll probably really, really like this. All right. That was the 1970s in all its horror and trash and what the F is wrong. I am dying of heat exhaustion and just dripping sweat everywhere, so I am going to end this video here. I will catch you all this weekend with a wrap up of the rest of what I read in August. Bye.